has a best friend, and her name is Becky. And Becky broke up with her boyfriend at the end of the summer. Still a mess at Thanksgiving, still crying. Stephanie said, okay, we're going away, you and I, 1 week. Becky said, where are we going? Steffi said, I haven't decided yet. When she decided on a yoga retreat. Becky cheered up. Then Becky and her boyfriend made up. Becky called, said, I'm sorry. He doesn't want me going anywhere without him. That's what Stephanie said. Steffi said, but that's why you broke up. Becky said, sorry. Stephanie called the yoga retreat, and she explained all about Becky and her stupid boyfriend. She was hoping for a refund. Man on the phone said, they must often change, those who would be constant in happiness and wisdom. Stephanie said, what? Man on the phone said, sorry, no refunds. So Stephanie called her mother. Morley said, sweetie, I'd love to go with you, but we open a new production that week and I can't. I think you should take your father. Stephanie said, are you out of your mind? Morley said, he's right here. Let me put him on the line. The retreat was in the country, down a tree-lined driveway to an old Catholic monastery, up on a hill overlooking a lake. They went to the main desk and registered. The lady who was sitting at the desk smiled up at them. The lady said, well, you're here for the cleanse. Dave said, for the what? The lady said, Bodhidharma will search your bags now. Bodhidharma opened Dave's suitcase and removed a pack of beef jerky and a bag of gummy worms. There was a tour. A woman with flared pants, a cotton wrap, and a headband showed them around. She left them at the rejuvenation desk. You can choose 3 treatments each, she said. It's part of the package. Well, Stephanie chose Pamper Yourself, a Swedish massage, a mineral mud bath, and a sea salt pedicure. Dave looked the menu up and down while she was choosing and visibly relaxed. Just wasn't as strict as he thought it was going to be. Dave chose happy. 3 honey mint refresh colonic cocktails. What are you thinking? Said Stephanie. Well, I'm thinking, said Dave, when did I ever stop after just one? There were already 2 women in the hall when Dave arrived at his first class. Took a mat off the wall, unfurled it, and sat down while the room filled up around him. For the longest time, he was the only man in the room. And then another guy came in. He was wearing knee-length yoga pants and a form-fitting tank top. He had a red bandana around his shoulder-length hair, yoga beads around his wrist, and a tattoo of a lotus flower on his ankle. Dave was wearing a plaid shirt, Bermuda shorts, and lime green ankle socks. Guy snapped his mat open in the middle of the room like a flag. And then he bent forward at the waist as if he was going to touch his toes, except he didn't touch his toes. He went way beyond his toes. He went over and right up into a handstand. Then he started doing push-ups. Handstand push-ups. He did 10. And then he unwound slowly until he was standing again with his palms pressed together in front of his chest. Looked like he was praying, but he wasn't praying. He was looking around the room to see if anyone was looking at him. After class, handstand guy came over to Dave and put his arm around his shoulder and said, stick with it, bro. Poses don't begin until your mind forgives. And then he said, "Namaste," and he walked away. Dave's first treatment was scheduled for just before dinner. "Cocktail hour," he chirped to Stephanie. And then he skipped out of their bedroom. He didn't look so chirpy when he came back. Came back all pale and sweaty, his clothes disheveled. "How was it?" said Stephanie. "Well, a little different than I expected," said Dave. Then he said, "Whoops, excuse me." He ran for the washroom. Next morning, class began with the sun salutation. Dave peered around the room. Everyone else had landed the first posture with their palms flat on the floor. His palms were swinging around his knees. He felt stiff. He felt clumsy and awkward. Surely he thought there was someone worse than him in the room. And so he looked around. He caught the eye of handstand guy. Handstand guy winked at him through his ankles. "Keep at it, bro," said handstand guy when class was over. Pose doesn't begin until you want to leave it. Another classroom, another class, and Dave was lying on his back. There was music playing softly, and there was a teacher at the front of the classroom, and teacher was saying, "Bring your right knee to your chest. Now hug your knee with your arm. Bring your head to your knee and exhale." And right then in the deep silence after teacher, some of you are familiar with this pose. Right then, in the deep silence after teacher said exhale, there was an explosion. Or more accurately, a series of rapid little explosions. And teacher said, "Well, now we all know why they call it the wind-releasing pose." "Bro," said handstand guy on the way out. "That's not what they mean when they say exhale." The lotus position. The lotus position is not the most dramatic-looking yoga posture, not by a long shot. At first glance, you would think anyone could do lotus. The Buddha did it after all. So did Gandhi. And neither of them, said Dave to Stephanie at dinner that night, strike me as the most athletic-looking dudes. Pose is said to be the path to enlightenment. And all you have to do, said Dave, is cross your legs and sit there like a lotus flower, open to the light. Best of all, handstand guy had bad knees. Handstand guy couldn't do lotus. Daha, said Stephanie. Well, it's not about that, said Dave. Seriously, it's not about that. It's not a competition. The problem is that as simple as it looks, the lotus is virtually impossible for a beginner. Only a fool would try to pry themselves into lotus without years of preparation. But fools do rush in. Dave woke early and slipped out of bed, let himself into the studio at the far end of the building. And as the sun came up, he stood by the window and studied the chart of yoga postures. Limbered up for a while. And then he sat down and he placed his right foot on his left thigh. Then he grabbed his left foot and tried to muscle it up onto his right thigh. There was no way. But there had to be a way. And so he leaned both elbows and all the weight of his upper body on his knee. And there was a sudden snap and then a flash of pain deep in his body like a flash of lightning. It was there and then it was gone. That was odd, thought Dave. And then he looked down at his legs. His right foot was on his left thigh. His left foot was on his right. He was in lotus. A profound sense of well-being washed over him, a sense of oneness with the world, until he realized his left foot was asleep. And he couldn't move his legs. His legs were knotted together, and the more he tried to free them, the tighter they got. He wasn't in full lotus. He was in sheep shank. It took him an hour to drag himself down the corridor back to the bedroom. Used his hands to pull himself along on his bottom. Anywhere else in the world, he would have been a disturbing sight. Here, everyone just nodded as he passed. Namaste, 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 namaste. It was exhausting work. Halfway back to his room, he stopped and propped himself up against the wall. When he woke up, there was an embroidered hat sitting on the floor next to him full of spare change. It took Stephanie 40 minutes and a container full of Vaseline to untangle her father. When she finished, his legs were way too wobbly to walk, although he could put them behind his ears. Look what I can do, he said. And that's what he was doing. He was sitting on the bed with his feet behind his head when there was a knock on the door. It was Bodhidharma. Cocktail hour. That night, Dave dreamed he was being chased through a dark kingdom. There were baboons and eels, and in the distance, a volcano that rumbled and groaned and kept erupting over and over and over again. Next morning, he dragged himself out of bed and staggered off to class. Teacher said, if you haven't done headstand, you should do tripod instead. Well, he had been defeated one too many times. He was not going to be tripod guy in handstand guy's room. Dave said, I've done headstands. Not recently. But it wasn't hard, was it? Teacher said, place your head on the floor in front of your knees. Now, raise your legs slowly and gently place your knees on your elbows. Well, that wasn't the way he remembered it, was it? The way he remembered it was to go up quickly and with commitment. Get to the top, you had to commit. Everyone else was lined up in front of the wall, their knees on their arms in a sort of tripod squatty way. Finally, thought Dave, finally there was something he could do better than everyone else. So while everyone else balanced there on their arms, Dave counted to himself. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, and on 3 to get ready, he put his forehead on the ground and he kicked his feet up with all the force he could muster. He hit so hard his heels broke through the drywall. There was an explosion of dust, and everybody stopped what they were doing and stared at Dave, who managed to hold the pose for a moment or two. But after a moment or two, his arms started to shake, and then they gave out. But he didn't fall, because he was being held in place by his planted heels. He was hanging on the wall like an upside-down picture, trying to project a look of yogic calm. He crossed his arms. And there was a beat of yogic silence until everyone heard the sound of a faraway rumble beginning in his upside-down tummy. Dave checked out that afternoon. 2 days early. They bumped into a handstand guy in the lobby. "Leaving early?" he said. "Well, bro," said Dave. And he set his suitcase down, and he walked around the desk, and he put his arm around handstand guy. And he looked at him and he said, "Everybody knows the poses always end when the plaster breaks." They didn't charge him for the damage to the studio walls, but they weren't pleased. "In light of the circumstances," said the lady who checked them out, "you will understand if we don't give you the third of your complimentary cocktails." Dave nodded. "Namaste," he said. "Namaste."